There was a time about 100 years ago when the United States military knew exactly who the real enemy was, and it wasn't Russia and it wasn't China. It was Britain. In the 1920s, the U.S. military developed something called War Plan Red, a detailed contingency plan for war with the British Empire, with Canada as Britain's proxy. And right now, Donald Trump is dusting off a modern version of that same plan. Now, if you're watching the mainstream media, they're telling you Trump is recklessly threatening our alliances with his demands about Greenland. And Britain's premier foreign policy outlet, Chatham House, is now saying this about the United States. European leaders will remain concerned about Europe's ability to defend itself with a more unpredictable and even hostile U.S. And Chatham House also reported that in December, Denmark's military intelligence service classified the United States as a security risk for the first time. But here's what they're not telling you. Trump isn't threatening our alliances. He's ending 80 years of British control over American foreign policy. And he's doing it by reviving the strategic clarity that our military once had when they created War Plan Red. I'm Susan Kokinda. And for 50 years, I've tracked the British Empire's tactics and institutions. And I can tell you what you're watching right now is endgame. So if this is your kind of fight, please hit the like, share, and subscribe button to stay in touch and so we can spread our outreach. So today, I'm going to show you three things. Why NATO leaders are now discussing protecting Greenland from the United States. I'm going to talk about the forgotten War Plan Red, when America's military actually planned for war against Britain. And third, how Trump is taking on the monopolies at home, that these are the same British financial interests that shape the post-war world, and they also run the cartels strangling your housing and your health care. Now, if you're watching the mainstream media, they're telling you Trump wants Greenland for its minerals or its military bases, or it's about Russia and China. Well, there are elements to some of that. But there's much, much more. Look at what the foreign policy establishment is actually panicking about. The Atlantic Council, NATO's outpost here in the United States, just published a piece titled, "Trump's Quest for Greenland Could Be NATO's Darkest Hour." And Bloomberg reported that the United Kingdom and Germany are now discussing deploying NATO forces to Greenland to protect it from the United States. Let that sink in. NATO allies are discussing how to protect a NATO member from the United States, the supposed leader of NATO. Here's what Chatham House is really worried about. The cornerstone of NATO policy, Article 5, which triggers U.S. military support for NATO members. Here's what they say. The U.S., NATO's most powerful country by far, threatening to attack a NATO member state further damages Article 5's credibility. You bet it does. But it gets even more interesting. They continue, and they say, traditional alliance systems are reshaping daily, and European states might find they need support from other South American or other global South states in the future. And then the folks at Chatham House are very worried about the reports of potential U.S. cooperation deal on Arctic energy projects, and they got even more nervous in November with the 28-point peace plan, which includes joint Russian-U.S. plans for rare earth mineral extraction in the Arctic. Did you catch that? Europe may have to realign with the global South while the U.S. is working on Arctic economic deals with Russia. This is the British establishment admitting that Trump has broken their carefully crafted post-World War II Atlantic system. And here's the kicker about Greenland itself. The idea that Greenland belongs to Denmark is purely an artifact of imperial policy. Greenland didn't even get self-government until 2009, and it still has no power over its own foreign policy, currency, or defense. Denmark controls all of that. And according to the Danish media, those tensions recently broke out between Greenlandic and Danish parliamentarians, with one Greenlander accusing Denmark of neo-colonial methods. And opposition leaders in Greenland are now saying they want to negotiate directly with the United States, not through Copenhagen. So when Trump talks about Greenland, He's really talking about dismantling one of the last vestiges of European colonial control in the Western Hemisphere. And NATO, the military arm of that old imperial system, knows that if Greenland goes, the whole structure starts to crumble. Now, if you're finding this history eye-opening, if you're realizing there's a whole framework for understanding the British Empire's operations that you never heard before, you should go to the Promethean Action website and subscribe to our free newsletter. But let's dig deeper into why Greenland matters strategically. Everyone keeps saying it's about Russia and China. And yes, there are Russian and Chinese elements to this. But what if they aren't your main enemy? What if the real concern is Britain and Canada? Now pull out a map and look at the world from the North Pole down. Greenland sits right between Britain and North America. And of course, the northern part of North America is Canada. What's the significance of that? Think about this geography when we look at War Plan Red. Because War Plan Red was a contingency plan for war with Britain, and Canada was the key proxy. This plan was approved and updated under the tenure of Navy Secretary Charles Francis Adams III. Now, names do matter in history. Charles Francis Adams III was not just a bureaucrat. He was the great-grandson of President John Quincy Adams, and he was the grandson of Charles Francis Adams Sr. Why is that significant? Because Charles Francis Adams Sr. was Abraham Lincoln's minister to Britain during the Civil War. He was the man on the ground in London, and he was the key figure who prevented the Empire from diplomatically recognizing the Confederacy. This family understood the game. The grandfather spent the 1860s preventing the British from destroying the Union diplomatically. The grandson spent the 1920s preparing contingencies for a British attack on the U.S. They understood that the Republic and the Empire are incompatible forms of government. And for the last 80 years, we've forgotten that lesson. But Donald Trump is simply dusting off a modern version of War Plan Red, a war for political and economic sovereignty from empires and monarchies. Now, if you're finding this history eye-opening, if you're realizing there's a whole framework for understanding the British Empire's operations that you never heard before, you should go to the Promethean Action website and subscribe to our free newsletter. Because when you look at the fight from the standpoint of Republic versus Empire, everything President Trump is doing makes perfect sense. So use the link to subscribe. Because while President Trump dismantles the empire's rules-based order, he hasn't forgotten the domestic one. The same British financial interests that shaped the post-war strategic landscape run the monopolies right here in our own backyard. The empire doesn't just operate through monarchies and NATO. It operates through monopolistic cartels right here at home, protecting the financial interests that have strip-mined the American middle class. And this week, Donald Trump targeted the two biggest burdens crushing the American people and especially young families, housing and health care. Look at Trump's Truth Social post. He announced he is immediately taking steps to ban large institutional investors from buying single-family homes. For the last decade, these giant institutional investors, the Blackstones, the Vanguards, the State Streets, they've been gobbling up single-family housing stock. They swoop in, outbid young couples and other Americans, and turn what should be a family's primary asset into a permanent rental stream for a hedge fund. This was fulfilling the WEF's playbook of turning us into a nation of renters, owning nothing, and supposedly being happy. But by forcing these institutions to divest, the administration wants to flood the market with supply and bring prices back down to reality. And the markets aren't too happy with Trump's announcement. Barron's reported that real estate funds slipped after Trump's announcement this week. But Trump didn't stop there. Federal Housing Finance Director Bill Pulte called this investor ban just the first punch. He said the second punch was the direction to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to purchase up to $200 billion in mortgage-backed securities to begin to drive down mortgage rates. The effect of both of these actions was to immediately begin to bring some more mortgage rates down below 6%. Of course, the other huge burden is the cost of health care. We discussed that in the Wednesday briefing when Trump challenged Republicans in Congress to join him in the simple revolutionary concept of no money to the insurance companies, give it directly to the American people. But actually, the biggest cartel of all isn't housing, and it isn't even healthcare. It's the one Eisenhower warned us about, the military-industrial complex. And in a series of blistering posts, President Trump demanded that major defense contractors end their stock buybacks and cap their salaries. Think about this. These companies took taxpayer money meant for defense and used it to pump up their own stock prices instead of building ships or fixing planes. He's demanding that they stop being financial institutions and start being industrial ones. And the president has said that this economic message is the one he's going to deliver at Davos in a week and a half. Break the financial parasites so the real economy and real families can grow. So let's connect the dots. Trump's moves on Greenland aren't about territorial expansion. They're about ending NATO as an instrument of imperial control and securing the Western Hemisphere against countries which still operate under monarchies, like Britain, Denmark, and Canada. The War Plan Red framework shows us that the American military leadership once understood who the real enemy was, and Trump is reviving that clarity. And domestically, from Wall Street's housing grab to the Pentagon's stock buybacks, Trump is dismantling the cartels that have turned American citizens into serfs in their own country.